could just sit down right now and we could be done for the day. Good job, Eli. Let's give him another hand. That should be on. It should be on. Did I? You know how you need technology.
Here's the thing.
Look behind it. Just look at the slide, Mom.
I got a blue light and a blinking. Hey, there we go. So that's today. And I got everything written down, but so much has happened between last night when I finished writing it down and today. A couple of things I got to tell you. Last week, probably been the early part of last week, I decided I was done. I decided I didn't want to go to church anymore. I didn't want to come here anymore. And I knew that Satan was throwing everything he had against me. Everything he had. And I couldn't fight it. I could not fight it. I was ready to tell Scooter, I'm stepping back. I'll do today because I made that commitment. But I'm done. I also was prepared to do deeper last Wednesday, the Bible study that we do. And I came in last Wednesday just not wanting to do it. Just get it done and get it out. And God said, no, I ain't done with you yet. He beat that sumbitch back. He beat him back, and he beat him back big. I had a failure of faith last night, or I should say this morning. That old devil, he came at me again. You ever have a dream that you wake up in the morning and you feel so awesome because the dream was just amazing, and you feel like you can take on the rest of the day? You got the power to just take on the rest of the day. You ever have those dreams that you just wake up from and it's just great? Well, last night I had a dream that made me feel the opposite. I had a dream that somebody new had taken over Life Point, and he grabbed my book that I had today's message written in, and he threw it out the window. He says, "You are not discussing this today." And I woke up this morning just feeling, okay. I knew I was going to do it anyway because I didn't have anything else prepared. But it was a last-ditch effort to beat me back. I've had this message for several months, and I've been dying to preach it. And I don't know if I'll do it any justice. In my heart and in my head, it's a good one. But we'll see. Today we'll talk about failure. As we say in this neck of the woods, Houston, we have a problem. This is a difficult subject because it's so huge a topic. And I could just fill today with just stories of my own failure. The most common failures probably revolve around our New Year's resolutions. How many have made New Year's resolutions and how many have failed at them already? Yes. You don't have to raise your hand. But I'm talking to myself, like Scooter says up here. I'm preaching to my own self. How many made resolutions and failed at them? We fail on a daily basis. Some failures are small and some are big. Let's look at that definition. Failure is an omission of occurrence or performance, specifically a failing to perform a duty or expected action. Now, an expected action If you're a follower of Christ, your expected action is to follow Christ and do what we are commanded to do from our handbook, the Bible. A state of inability to perform a normal function, an abrupt cessation of normal functioning. Okay, we follow Christ, but tomorrow we're going to stop that. It's a failure. Lack of success, a failing in business, a falling short. Deterioration, decay, one that has failed. These are all things that we do every day in our life. We fail at something. We fail in our relationship. We have an argument. We fail in our relationships. We fail in our relationships with each other. We fail in our relationships with God. Don't let me get you down just yet. Can we name some failures from the history? This guy comes to mind. He failed a lot. But you think about Charlie Brown. Some of his failures weren't his fault. You might even say that his failure was the fact that he still believed in Lucy even after she did that how many times? And is that a failure? Here's another guy that comes to mind. Anybody know who that is? That's Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. Does anybody know who Oswald the Lucky Rabbit is? Eli does. No, he actually knew. He saw. He put the slides together, and he goes, "Is that Oswald?" This is Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, created in 1927 by Walt Disney. Disney and his staff made silent cartoons that were distributed by Universal Pictures. When Disney learned that Universal was poaching his animation staff, he walked away, and he lost this cartoon. He lost everything. Walt Disney lost everything. He even lost Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. Thus Mickey Mouse was born. From failure came success. Would Oswald have been as successful as Mickey Mouse? Can you imagine Annette doing the Oswald the Lucky Rabbit Club? Just doesn't ring as well, does it? Walt Disney lost everything. He lost his studio. He lost his staff. He lost his animators. He lost everything. I think he picked himself up pretty good. Now I got this story. From the pages of Paul Harvey comes this story. I loved listening to Paul Harvey when I was a kid. AM radio. There are only two, if you know Paul Harvey, get his voice in your head. There are only two possible explanations for what you're about to hear. It was either the most phenomenal coincidence that ever occurred, or it was literally an act of God. Sworn statements and legal documents say that this is true. There is documentation to back up this story. There was just one problem with Swan Quarter, North Carolina. It was a lowland town. Naturally, the choicest real estate there is on the highest ground, and because of heavy rains, the lower you are, the harder you're hit. A little over 100 years ago, the Methodists of Swan Quarter had no church. The only available plot was a low-lying one on Oyster Creek Road, far from the ideal location, but this was the land they acquired and construction began. White frame, small but sturdy, propped up on brick pilings, and it was completed in 1876. Their first service was Sunday, September 16th. 3 days later, a terrible storm. 3 days later after this church opened, a terrible storm lashed Swan Quarter. It rained all day, and by nightfall, devastation was imminent. Much of the town was underwater. Winds howled and blew roofs off buildings. The storm raged on through the night. It didn't stop until that afternoon of the next day, and the clouds broke into an eerie calm. One by one, the citizens of Swan Quarter threw back their shutters and witnessed the desolation, a community ravaged by nature. But those within sight of Oyster Creek Road beheld a most incredible sight they had ever seen. The Methodist Church that had just been built, the Swan Quarter Methodist Church, the whole building, intact, was floating down the street. The floodwaters had lifted it from its brick pilings, gently lifted the entire structure, and set it off slowly and silently down Oyster Creek Road. Within minutes, the townspeople were sloshing about trying to stop the church that had set sail. They attached ropes and tried to tie the building off to any mooring they could find, but nothing could stop the church. More aid was enlisted, but the church sailed on. Now the building made it to the center of town. Then, as dozens watched, the church made a sharp right turn, continued down that road as though the church was alive, as though it had a mind of its own, and it sailed for 2 more blocks. Then, with deliberate action, the church veered off the road and headed for the center of a vacant lot, and there it stopped. When the water finally receded, the church remained, and it's there to this day. There it is. Over 100 years have passed since the church removed itself to the most desirable property in Swan Quarter. In the process of making up your mind about just what happened, you should know this one thing more. The choice Highland lot where the chapel now sits was the first choice of the town Methodists. This is where they wanted the church in the first place. And that shrewd, prosperous landowner whose property it was originally turned them down. But that next morning, after the flood, after discovering the church in the middle of his lot, that same landowner went to the Methodist minister and with trembling hands presented him with the deed at no cost whatever. And now you know the rest of the story. The Methodists failed to get the lot that they wanted for their church. They knew that was the better place. It was high ground. It was going to be protected. But they failed. God had other ideas. That's a true story. Could you imagine seeing that? So, there's another story. A teacher was writing the 9 times tables on the chalkboard, 9 times 1, 9 times 2, 9 times 3. And when he got to 9 times 10, he put equals 91. The classroom erupted in laughter and ridicule. What they didn't know was the teacher did this on purpose. He said that despite the fact that he got 9 of them right, no one congratulated him. But when he made one mistake, everyone started laughing. He explained that even if a person is successful, society will notice his slightest mistake. We are wired to notice failure over accomplishment. That's the devil. He explained that even if a person is successful, society will notice his slightest mistake. The only person who never makes a mistake is someone who does nothing and will accomplish nothing. I'm going to stop right here and tell you that failure is a good thing. If those guys out on the Cape had listened to failure and stopped, where would they be? If Walt Disney had listened to failure and stopped, where would that have been? If you were going through failure right now, that's a good thing. Because you're learning. You're becoming a better person. This story, this message came to me while I was on vacation, and I saw this shirt. A smooth sea never made a skillful sailor. We can all go home now. We can all go home now. A smooth sea never. Could you imagine being in a boat with a captain who had never experienced any problems, any failures, anything, and then a storm kicked up? Could you imagine that? Could you imagine being at a church where the pastor never experienced anything wrong, never experienced a failure, and then you expect him to help him through yours? Or a doctor. Holy cow, could you imagine being on an operating table with a doctor who never had to deal with a heart stopping, who never had to deal with a patient who ceased breathing? Oh, what do I do? Welcome that failure, because he knows what to do. He failed at it at some point in his career. Psychologist. Imagine a psychiatrist, psychologist, and all their patients were fine. Don't know how to deal with that person that comes up with a problem. If you have failure, welcome it. Embrace it. Enjoy it. I always say if it were sunny every day, we would never appreciate the sun. But because of the rain, we appreciate the sun, and vice versa. If it were sunny every day, we'd never appreciate it. If everybody was all sunshine and lollipops and unicorns, we'd never appreciate it. Hardship is what makes us. Hardship is what makes us, what strengthens us, what empowers us. I gotta put my glasses back on. So back in the 90s, I guess maybe 80s, back in the 80s, I worked in a large grocery chain in Maryland as a young man. I was successful and I was moving up the management chain. It was also the heyday of the video store. Anybody remember video stores? You youngins, there's a store where you had to go and get videos and take them home and watch them.
I just explained that to Jace. He's like, what was a Blockbuster? And I was like,
What was a Blockbuster?
I had this whole conversation with him.
Uh-huh. It was also a place where I found great joy in working. I worked at a little mom and pop store there part-time when I wasn't working full-time at the grocery store. One morning, the owner of the video store called me and he said he had an emergency and could I go in and open the store? I told him that I would and proceeded to call in sick to my full-time job at the grocery store. I really loved this video store job. It was probably one of the best jobs I ever had. Keep in mind that the video store was miles away from the grocery store where I worked, in another town even. While the video store was in a strip mall that contained another location of the grocery store where I worked, I wasn't afraid because no one at this grocery store location even knew me. I'm cheerfully helping customers with their video choices when I glance across the parking lot and see my grocery boss casually visiting other stores in the strip mall while she was on a break. Blood drained from my face. There was nothing I could do. She casually came into my store, looked around, and then saw me working behind the counter. Shock came to her face, and I just could feel my life slipping away from me. She was at the other store, just helping them out. They were shorthanded. And that day, she went to help them out. 20 miles away from my store. She had to help out the store where I was sneaking out on her. Well, I was eventually pushed out at the grocery store, needless to say, losing health benefits and a full-time job. I could no longer be trusted. What I learned from that failure is that being reliable came first, sometimes to what I wanted to do. Being reliable, your word was important. And that was a life lesson to me as a young man in my 20s. That failure carved so much of the rest of my life in just that one morning. My work ethic was born. Now I have another story of my failure. After the last hurricane, I was helping my cousin install a new mailbox in his yard because somebody had hit it and knocked it down. So we were digging a hole and installing a new mailbox in his yard, and there was a lady across the street, and she was sweeping up branches and pine needles and pine cones and all this stuff out of her yard. She was raking it all up, and she was raking it across the street, and she was piling it up in my aunt's yard. And that just blew me away. How dare you have the gumption for that? She raked her yard across the street and into my aunt's yard. And I told my cousin, I was like, Dan, will you look at that? Can you believe the gumption on this woman? She was an older woman, but she was out there cleaning her yard. She had a nice yard too. And raking it all into my aunt's yard. And my cousin Dan looked at me and goes, "You got a rake?" I said, Yeah, I got a rake. And I went and I got it for him and I gave it to him. And I was like, "Go get him, Dan. Go get him." And he went over into her yard and started helping her rake her yard into my aunt's yard. Talk about a failure of faith right there. That's a story I will always, always, always remember. He didn't tell me what he was going to do. He just, "You got a rake?" And he went over there and he started raking with her. He knew that the debris was going to be picked up by the city at some point. She had a nice yard, my aunt's yard not so much. But the way that made me feel, another lesson in my character was born. I failed, but I came back stronger. That's what failure does to you. You fail, and you come back stronger. Let's go to the next slide. Now, I can talk about experience, but this is what matters. Luke 22, verse 54 through 62. Then they seized him, meaning Jesus, and led him away, bringing him into the high priest's house, and Peter was following at a distance. And when they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat down among them. Then a servant girl, seeing him as he sat in the light, and looked closely at him and said, "This man was also with him." But he denied it, saying, "Woman, I do not know him." And a little later, someone else saw him and said, "You're also one of them." But Peter said, Man, I am not. And after an interval of about an hour, still another insisted. Another insisted. Certainly this man also was with him, for he too is a Galilean. But Peter said, Man, I do not know what you are talking about. And immediately, while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed, and the Lord turned and looked at Peter. And Peter remembered the saying of the Lord, how he had said to him, Before the rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times. And he went out and wept bitterly. There's failure for you. There's failure for you. But a little bit later on in the story, Don, let me have that next verse. John 21, verse 4 through 14. Just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore. Now this is after his resurrection. Yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, Children, do you have any fish? They answered him, No. He said to them, Cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some. Does that sound familiar? That's how he got these guys in the first place. He stood on the shore and he said, Cast your net on the other side. And they could barely pull in the net, so full of fish. Now Jesus had been crucified horribly and resurrected. And he's standing on the shore again, telling them to cast the net on the right side. So they cast it. And now they were not able to haul it in because of the quantity of fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved therefore said to Peter, It is the Lord. When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and threw himself into the sea. The other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from land, about 100 yards off. When they got out on land, they saw a charcoal fire in place, with fish laid out on it and bread. Jesus said to them, Bring some of the fish that you have just caught. So Simon Peter went on board and hauled the net ashore, full of large fish, 153 of them. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, Come and have breakfast. Peter denied this man 3 times. A heinous failure to our Lord Jesus Christ. And Jesus stood on the shore afterward and said, Come, break bread with me. Along with failure comes forgiveness. There are going to be people that will fail you. And you can forgive them. Scooter's going to fail you. Your pastor's going to fail you. Your elected officials are going to fail you. Your neighbor is going to fail you. Your family is going to fail you. But we are taught to say, Come, break bread with me. Along with failure comes forgiveness. Jesus didn't even bring it up. Hey, you remember that time before I was crucified that you said you didn't know me? Yeah, well, I haven't forgotten that. No, he said, You're going to build my church. How many times can we go, you remember that time you borrowed my chainsaw and you broke it and you snuck it back in my garage as if nothing happened? Come break bread with me. Jesus didn't even bring it up. Next one, Don. Some of the worst people in the Bible made the most positive impact. Why? Because their story did not end with their mistake. It finished with their comeback. You might feel like you're defeated, but your story isn't over. Your victory is coming. Who believes our God is greater? Our God is stronger. Eli, I think there's a song in there somewhere. Be defeated. Enjoy the defeat. Because you know the victory that comes afterwards. Be worse to first. Eli, come on up. Have I got one more?
You got that, and then you got.
Yep. Remember this guy?
Sorry.
No, go back.
I know.
Remember this guy? Defeated. Fail. And he never brought it up. Yeah, on Halloween he got a rock. But it didn't change his relationship with his friends. Yeah, she pulled that football out every time. But it didn't affect his relationship with her. Love your failure. Embrace your failure. Because the victory is coming. And now, Dawn, the big takeaway. Failure may be a blessing. It's definitely a lesson. And never a life sentence.
Amen.
Never a life sentence. Think of all the failures in the world and things that came from them. The Romans and Satan thought that with the death of Jesus, that was their victory. We know what happened afterwards. And the same holds true for us. If we just ask, if we just pray, our victory is coming. Our victory over failure. Use failure as a lesson, as a starting point, as a kickoff. And ask God to help you along the way. He's not going to say no. There we go. That's what I've had on my heart for a while. Because I am the king of failure. I could have filled this book with failures. And today I stand up here stronger than ever. Because I've got someone investing in me. I've got the highest power in the world investing in me. I cannot fail. I cannot lose. No matter how much I tear it up, how much I do wrong, no matter how much I fail, I cannot lose. We cannot lose. We're all going to win. And we just can't lose sight of that. Father, I thank you for this day. I thank you for the message that you give me. I thank you for my failures. But most of all, I thank you for my victories. I thank you for the strength that you pound into my heart, into my body, into my brain. Though I resist it, though I shun it, though I push it away, you never give up. You never cease. And you never fail. Father, be with us all. Fill us all with that strength, with that glory, with that might. Cast away the devil from our hearts, from our minds. Throw him out. For you cannot be defeated. Jesus, we love you, we love you, we love you.